Rain fell like borrowed grief. He saw her at the company gate, soaked, an envelope clutched to her chest, trembling from something deeper than cold. Rihan's car idled. He stepped out, collar up, shoes wet, and the world narrowed to the look in her eyes, equal parts fear and plea. "You shouldn't be here," he said. She didn't answer. She pushed the envelope toward him. "You need to read this," she whispered. Through damp paper, Rihan glimpsed a faded photograph. His mother, younger, laughing beside a small girl with braids and his same stubborn mouth. Hira explained in jagged breaths. Work at a night printing shop, a sick daughter named Amy, accused of taking parcels from the warehouse, arrested when she searched for someone who might remember a name. Her hands trembled as she held the photo like a prayer. They moved inside to the lobby where the rain made small reflections underfoot. Rihan read the letter in the envelope, his mother's handwriting, an apology for a mistake, an instruction. "If you find this girl, tell her she is family." The sentence landed like a dropped stone. He introduced himself, produced his card, and used his name to stall the paperwork. It felt awkward, improper. Authority wielded to save a single desperate woman, but he needed time to think. Outside, rain kept writing its own insistence on glass. At the hospital, they found the child sleeping with a fevered forehead. Hera smoothed the girl's hair with hands that had learned to work through exhaustion. Watching, Rihan felt something rearrange inside him. The photograph was no trick. The resemblance sat like a claim. He promised to help with medical bills and to investigate the accusation, small, practical things. She pressed the envelope to her chest. "If you find anything," she began, then stopped. He said he would call. They parted beneath a dim streetlight. Rain made the world mercifully honest. Rihan drove home with the photograph on the passenger seat, the image of his mother and the small girl looping in his head. He had power and money, yes, but now he had a question he could not set aside. He sat awake until dawn, turning that single sentence in the letter like a key, until resolve hardened into a plan. He remembered the sound of his mother's kettle, the way she hummed when she thought no one listened. Memories hit without warning. A child's small hands reaching for a biscuit, a lullaby half remembered, and with them a sudden, uncomfortable clarity. Family sometimes arrives as a question, not an answer. He looked at the photograph again, tracing the curve of that familiar mouth with his thumb. Hira rested her forehead against the cot and whispered his mother's name as if testing it. The name hung between them, fragile and absurd and utterly real. He promised himself he would not leave that promise folded in an envelope to dissolve in rain. The next morning, Rihan walked to his mother's old flat before business meetings and shareholder updates. The building smelled of boiled tea and stairwell dust. He climbed the narrow steps 2 at a time, the photograph folded in his pocket like contraband. Neighbors paused to nod. They knew his face, the CEO, but not the way his hands trembled now. In the little kitchen, he found a shoebox under the sink. Old letters, a child's sock, receipts that told of small, ordinary struggles. He opened a letter with his mother's looping script and found dates, names. A name he had never heard aloud, Razia. The letter spoke in soft, embarrassed tones about promises and mistakes, about a summer when money ran thin and choices were made to shield someone else. He drove to the printing shop Hira had named. The shop was a narrow room of humming machines and paper dust. Men who worked nights looked up from their stations when he introduced himself. Their eyes measured him, curious for a man whose life had moved in cleaner columns. Hira's boss, a woman with a scar of laughter, told him Hira had been honest and brave. She'd come looking for a name, she had said, a memory someone might carry. The boss handed Rihan a scrap of paper where Hira had scribbled an address. At the community center, an elderly volunteer with a braided white plate hummed as she dusted medals in a cabinet. She remembered Rihan's mother, soft, helpful, the sort who kept an extra packet of flour for those who needed it. She also remembered a young Razia who had vanished after a landlord dispute. "Your mother kept things because she thought it would fix what broke," the woman said. "But some things don't fix themselves." Rihan's calls stretched into the afternoon. He spoke with his father's old friend, a lawyer who had kept files folded like secrets. A name surfaced, an old arrangement, hush money, a settlement decades earlier, payments made to avoid scandal after a dispute. Rihan listened and then, with the slow mechanics of someone learning to feel, let anger and sadness braid together. He thought of his childhood, the polite dinners, the tidy apologies, and of Hera's hands the way she cradled her daughter's small temperature-warm cheek. He found Hera again at a municipal clinic, shivering on a plastic chair while Amy slept on a cot. Rihan sat opposite, the photograph between them like a small altar. They spoke about mothers who kept secrets, about the weight of needing help and being too proud to ask. Hera told him about the landlord's threats, the nights sown from worry, and the letter that had been a talisman on her shelf. "I thought maybe she'd remember," she said. "I thought seeing the photo would mean someone would open a door." Rihan realized this was not a problem he could solve with business strategy alone. It needed patience, respectful listening, and real risk, calling a name into the open and living with whatever followed. He promised to search and not to use his power for spectacle. It was a small vow. It would have to be enough. The file he opened at the lawyer's office smelled faintly of old tobacco and dust. Ledgers held names, sums, and dates. There was a thin ledger entry describing a settlement. Money moved quietly after a tenant dispute, records that read like a decision made to close a door. Then Rihan found a single folded page in his mother's hand. Not a legal note, but a parent's quiet plea. "If anything happens to me, find the girl. Tell her she is known. Tell her she is loved enough to be given a name." Anger rose first, sharp and bright. If hush payments had been used to seal a secret, then his life of polished appearances had a less compassionate underlayer. He tracked down the accountant, found the paper trail, and held evidence in his hands that the adults who'd promised protection had instead arranged distance. When he confronted his father that evening, the house smelled of brandy and old wood. Rihan spoke with brittle calm, reading the facts aloud. His father offered the exhausted rationality of men who hide human complications behind policy. "We thought it safer," he said. "Your mother wanted to protect everyone." "Protect?" Rihan echoed. "By hiding a person?" The conversation did not solve the ache. It gave him facts, but not the tenderness he wanted. He left with a hollow victory and drove to the clinic where Amy's fever had spiked. Hera paced. Small steps, like someone trying not to make a sound loud enough to break things further. Rihan moved through the ward with a new, decisive urgency. He negotiated with doctors, signed forms he had not read before, and insisted on a pediatric specialist. The hospital relented under his name and a promise of coverage, and Amy was moved to an ICU bed where monitors blinked a fragile rhythm. Hera watched with hands clenched, lips pressed like someone pinching herself not to fall apart. In the sterile light, Rihan laid all he'd found on Hera's lap. Letters, the photograph, ledger copies. He told her about the settlement, about the awkward conversation with his father, and about the single line from his mother's letter that had summoned him into action. "So I wasn't a mistake," Hera said finally, the sentence ridiculous and enormous. "No," Rihan said. He reached across and held her hand. That small gesture had no legal weight, no headline, only a human promise. They both cried not for drama but for the wasted years between them. When the child stirred and opened drowsy eyes, the moment felt less like an ending of sorrow and more like the start of something patient and repairable. Rihan stayed until Amy could sip water without coughing. He made calls to specialists, to social workers, and arranged short-term care. Then, in a quiet corridor, he used the single most powerful tool he had, an admission of kinship. "You're my sister," he told Hera. There was no press release, only the two of them, breath ragged and honest. She laughed once, a small broken sound that shook as it landed. It was not tidy, but it was theirs. In that hospital corridor they gathered in new, awkward ways, the fragments of a family. It would take time, and it would cost humility. But the first true choice had been made. He would not look away. After the hospital, things rearranged like furniture in a room being made livable. Rihan rented a small apartment above a bakery, so Hera and Amy would have a place to sleep with a quiet floor and warm bread downstairs. He arranged for medical follow-ups, cleared debts quietly, and met with a social worker to secure longer-term support. He did it without fanfare. He told only the people who needed to know. It felt right to move slowly, carefully, as if building a bridge that would not collapse. There were awkward dinners when Hera met household members who remembered his mother from children's stories. Old neighbors came by with small apologizes gossip. Rihan introduced Hira as his sister without fanfare. The family learned to hold the new fact like delicate glass. Some reacted with warmth, some with surprise. No one behaved perfectly. They tried. He found an old music box in a drawer and gave it to Amy. The child laughed at the tiny tune and reached for the spinning dancer with a hand that seemed to promise ordinary joys. Hira braided Amy's hair in the evenings. Rihan learned to carry lunch to the printing shop, or to bring a charger for a tired phone, small tasks that stitched past and present in honest stitches. Conversations with his father softened into quieter things. The elder man accompanied Rihan once to the cemetery and stood before a stone with shoulders bowed. Rihan read aloud the line from his mother's letter. "I hope to leave her a name." The wind moved through dry grass. His father placed a hand on Rihan's shoulder without words, and it felt like progress, an uneven human kind. Hira's anger took time. She had reasons to be bitter, years of absence and dismissals, but there were afternoons when she and Rihan sat with tea, trading small complaints about weather or a film they'd both somehow missed. Those moments were not theatrical, they were stitches. She taught him the exact way to fold a sari so pleats would keep themselves. He taught her to accept help without making it a debt. Months later, a modest potluck at the community center gathered neighbors who had watched the story unfold and wanted to celebrate a human, quiet miracle. Hira told the story about rain and a photograph. People laughed and cried in turns. Rihan listened and felt gratitude deepen into humility. He'd been given a new ledger, not of money but of memories, and he counted them with care. In the end, the lesson was less about restitution than attention. His mother had left a map, a name, a picture, a folded line of handwriting. She had trusted someone to notice. Rihan decided to live noticing, to answer phone calls at night, to fix small problems, to show up. He learned family as a verb, an action repeated. On a late afternoon, Rihan walked to the park where he had once played as a child. He sat on a bench and watched Amy chase pigeons while Hira laughed behind her. The photograph, folded now into his wallet, felt lighter. The sky dipped to gold. He turned the picture in his hand and smiled, a careful, honest smile. It wasn't tidy. There were apologies to make and time to earn. But as light softened the city, he thought of his mother not as someone who hid things away, but as someone who tried, in the only way she knew, to give a small protection. He chose then and there to make different choices, to notice, to stay. The rain had washed the gate clean, and beyond that sound the world was enough.